Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for Production Blockchain Insights for the C-Suite. My name is Carolina Kirby-Lucier. I'm going to be your moderator for today and kick things off. We will try to keep this panel to 35 minutes and then save about 10 minutes for questions and answers at the end of the session. Of course, feel free to enter your questions at any time during the session in the Q&A box. Hopefully everybody sees that. And you will also be receiving a copy of the recording and the presentation and other helpful resources via email from me after this recording takes place. Steve, you mind jumping to the next slide? All right, so we've got a lot of great information for you guys. At a really high level, we just want to help you understand how blockchain can help your business and how it's helping other companies and organizations right now, today, currently. So we'll deep dive into some of those kind of success stories and share some lessons learned. And then we'll talk about how you can work on your own project and accelerate that from proof of concept to production. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. On the line, we have the founders of Kaleido. I'm also on the team for Kaleido. So welcome so much, Steve and Sophia. And then we also have York, who is joining us from Microsoft. So take it away.
All right, maybe they were in, or going to start first?
Yeah, so either way, I think it would be nice for the audience to know a little bit more about your team. And then while you guys are doing that, if audience wants to go ahead and let us know kind of what stage they're in, if they're involved in a blockchain project currently.
Looks like there's some results coming in, early voting results coming in now as we speak. So, well, thanks everyone for joining. Nice to see some familiar names on the attendee list as well. Very excited to be here. So I'm Sophia Lopez. I've been in the blockchain space since about 2015, working with enterprise clients over those years. Really excited to share some of the insights we've seen, talk about some of the use cases, and just share some best practices and help those on the call get a good sense about some directions and takeaways they could take coming out of this webinar. Steve?
And hello, everyone. Thank you again for coming. Steve Cerveny. I'm also a co-founder of Kaleido and really excited to dig into this topic with you today. And thank you for tuning in wherever you are in the world.
Then we have a special guest, York Rhodes, who was one of the co-founders of blockchain at Microsoft, joining us today for his perspectives on the market and what enterprise clients are doing.
Hey, Steve and Sophia, glad to be here. I'm actually sitting in your consensus office in London today.
And we're glad to have you simulcasted in. So it's going to be a really fun 45 minutes with everyone today. If you want to interact with us, there is the chat, but we actually do have other members of the team who are going to be monitoring the question and answer. So I recommend if you have specific questions that just find the Q&A button and get them to us that way.
Great, and I think we want to just dive in. I think just in terms of the poll, Carolina, are we going to keep that up, or are we going to close the poll out, get final results tabulated?
Yeah, it looks like most people have already entered their information, so let's go ahead and kind of view those results.
Yeah, so it looks like about 20% of the audience is not actively involved with the blockchain project right now. Interesting to see that about 50% are in the exploration phase. the research. We use categories that correspond with some PwC research so we can compare to what they found as well. But that's not surprising. Sometimes we like to call them, blockchain tourism, I guess. But the research experimentation, we see a lot of innovation labs, digital transformation labs, emerging tech teams, all really looking at the potential of technology and finding that right fit for use cases and where they really could get the ROI. It looks like about 37% is in active development of a blockchain project, 15% are in a pilot phase, and 3% are live. So pretty good cross-section, matches, I think, what some other research in the market has been showing as well. Any comments, Steve?
That's about what I expected to see, and operating a platform in Kaleido with over 1,000 networks running. I think that reflects kind of what we're seeing as well on the platform. So very, very cool.
Yeah, thanks for.
Yeah, I think those numbers are similar to sort of how I talk about the market as well, where you're going to have sort of a sub 5% probably actually doing anything in production, and you also see that in the various press that's going on in the industry as well.
Yeah, we definitely feel it's really between 2018 and coming into 2019. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but just with some of the platforms and technology available, clients have been able to move very quickly from beginning coding a project to production. So we think it's a really good place for people to be who are now that 51% at the research phase. You'll be able to move much quicker than your predecessors from concept to consortium. So thanks again for participating in the poll.
And by the way, also not to be pessimistic, I think that 5% and less number is just reflective of how interesting and innovative the technology is, which means there's an education path, right? And then secondly, that it's hard to get to production, right? And if you're on a new technology path that's only existed in the market for a couple of years, it's what you expect, right? I mean, if it said 100% adoption, I would say that the numbers were highly suspect, right?
Yeah.
In terms of production deployments.
Yeah, I think we've got a good group on the phone, and it's pretty representative. Well, first a disclaimer: no unicorns were harmed in the making of this deck. But I guess the point, we just ended up on this slide for a while. I guess it was meant to be a quick, humorous point that blockchain has a lot of value, but it's not all magic pixie dust or unicorns or rainbows. It won't solve everything. And certainly sprinkling some blockchain on a project isn't a panacea. So today we're going to talk about how blockchain is enabling new business and trust models, and really designed to solve real world business problems, and that can be reinventing an existing process, and it's certainly, we see a lot of clients working on projects where just whole new revenue streams based on these business models as well. So in terms of the promise of blockchain, I think it's pretty clear just from our comments and how we advertise this conversation that we're talking about enterprise blockchain. And when you're looking at enterprise blockchain, it's really about all those existing business relationships that is an ecosystem today around a value chain, and taking that and putting that on a blockchain and getting all the benefits of that. And when enterprises are looking to do that, they're really looking to make their systems and sources of data and their business processes, it's all about better, faster, cheaper. But what they're seeing is blockchain is really creating extraordinary opportunities for businesses to come together in new ways. And that's with the new trust systems on blockchain that enable both an evolution and a revolution of these business relationships.
Yeah, and I think because blockchain is both the data store and the business logic execution and a network, it really has the potential to change the way that we do business, and to, in a word, to help us do more collaboration in our business, in the B2B world. And when you're thinking about collaborating, then you really need a technology stack or a computing system, if you will, that can give you the flexibility to get the right degree of trust and transparency. And those really are fundamental words that we talk about every day in the blockchain space.
Yeah, in terms of crossing chasm, moving from those early adopters to the early majority, we really feel that 2019 is the year blockchain gets real, and of course that has been prognosticated before, but we're seeing it in the client engagements and how fast people are moving. We did want to share just some statistics across Gartner, Deloitte, PwC. I think some of the main takeaways are really that, you know, companies are actively involved in blockchain, you know, more than 80%. You see the millions of dollars that companies are looking to spend this year, that execs are reporting on blockchain projects. They feel it's key to their competitive advantage. That's 78% from Deloitte. And Gartner, just looking down the road, has estimated 48% CAGR, you know, looking out the next 5 years, and looking out to 2030 at the $3.1 million of business value captured with blockchain.
Trillion.
Oh, sorry, trillion.
Yeah.
So it's pretty exciting time to be in the blockchain space. What makes it a transformative technology? And I think Steve was starting to allude to it. You were really looking at decades-old systems that have systems of record, and you have this technology for the first time that's going all the way back into the back office, into that system of record, and being able to remove a lot of pain points and inefficiencies around duplication of data, the reconciliation of data. And this is where a lot of the real benefits are coming the business process from a speed perspective and cost perspective. Any additional comments, York, on that, or Steve? What makes blockchain a transformative technology?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
And I think a lot of the audience gets that. So
yeah,
we'll keep chugging along and get into some of the insights.
Then just quickly looking at distribution of industries. I think none of this is a surprise. Financial services has been leading. With the role they play in their ecosystems, a lot of key players want to understand what that role would be in a blockchain-powered ecosystem. Supply chain is a very big use case across industrial products manufacturing. You could see some of the distribution of the other areas as well. I think since this survey was taken, we've probably seen a bigger uptick on entertainment and media and retail as well.
Yeah, and it's always nice to look across industries, but with the technology that's as fundamental as blockchain and really thinking about multi-party collaboration, it is universally applicable. I would agree with this data point. Certainly the financial services world has been leading the charge, but we've seen equal uptick for some of these other industries that are listed more recently, pushing into blockchain. And really it's that network aspect. So the value chains and supply chains that we've built out across all of these industries are so complex that that blockchain is equally applicable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think specifically if you think about supply chain as a horizontal application, supply chain can be digital media supply chain, it can be advertising supply chain, it can be goods and products supply chain. So I think that's actually the focus on supply chain and realization that is an interesting application has also driven some of that cross-industry awareness.
Great point. So we're going to dive into a couple examples of what clients are doing, but just wanted to give you a feel for the types of organizations, entities, companies that all have been looking seriously and moving their blockchain projects into production. We're actually going to kick off with one of the use cases New York is very familiar with. If you want to speak to this one. It's a bond bag.
Sure. So this is an application that was a collaboration between the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, the World Bank, and Microsoft. And what this basically did was to provide essentially the first digital blockchain development bond, which is the business that the World Bank is in, the providing development bonds essentially and debt issuances for emerging markets. And so in this particular project, this is basically using an Ethereum proof of authority blockchain as the registrar for the bond, and all of the activities from front to back in terms of bidding for positions from investments on that bond, as well as doing the allocations and effectively tracking all of the activities associated with that. The primary issuance actually happened last August, and they are right now going through a second release in terms of functionality to address some of the backlog items to continue to extend the capabilities there. So fundamentally, this is essentially, the concept of tokenizing, a debt instrument using blockchain as the way to do that. And then it also has particular benefits when we start to look at, the typical workflow party reduction scenarios that we see when we're doing these cross-party workflows in a blockchain, where you can start to reduce some of the unnecessary intermediaries that might be involved in the process in order to create trust.
Great, thanks, James, York, for that. I think we have a number of others. I think to give you a flavor of the use cases we're seeing across industries, Green Fence is a really interesting one. They are using blockchain to power different promotions in working with Sony and Fox in the entertainment space around releases of movies like Goosebumps 2 and others, and looking at how the new generation of moviegoers, how they want to interact, how they're enticed, what sort of marketing promotions are effective in creating scarcity, digital scarcity in sort of to interact in the digital medium with their audiences using Ethereum-based blockchain solution and digital collectibles. And they've done a number of these for a variety of movie promotions, and they've been very successful. They've also looked at the coupon space. So in the ad tech space, it's been said by various parties in that space that for every dollar that's spent, only a fraction of that, actually maybe 20 cents range, gets to the intended purpose. There's a lot of duplication, fraud, and waste there that now people across the industry are trying to tackle. What Green Fence did was working with a very popular promotion program, T-Mobile Tuesdays, used the digital coupons and the ERC 721 tokens to now really turbocharge the type of promotions that could be given. So this one shown here, where it's for spending $10 at Kroger, you get $3 off. Literally had hundreds of thousands of people downloading crypto wallets to their phone because it was so frictionless. In this case, they weren't advertising like use blockchain or experiment or play with this. The people were downloading it because it's a coupon. They're expecting every Tuesday for some interesting coupons to pop into their phone, and they basically blockchain was just the rails that was used to eliminate a lot of the friction and waste so that consumers could get a much better offer, and then sort of a seamless, frictionless experience to download the coupon and then redeem it.
One interesting aspect of this is in the blockchain world, we hear a lot about tokens, and it's been said tokens are the killer use case in the blockchain world. And I know if you have less context in the space, the first time you hear tokens, you may be thinking about the crypto world and all of that. In enterprise blockchain, when we talk about tokens, we're really thinking about digital assets or a digital way to represent real world assets. And we get into fungible and non-fungible tokens. Using a token to create a digital scarcity. This Green Fence use case has both, a digital coupon and kind of the real world and the fantasy world and the entertainment world, a digitally scarce, unique aspect, which is a whole category of interesting use cases in the gaming world and the media and entertainment space and so on.
Yeah, and it's interesting, we have the stat there, but they achieved digital engagement rates of 69%, which actually their marketing counterparts, these big labels and brands, it's just off the charts in terms of effectiveness of a marketing campaign. So that part was very exciting to them. I don't know, we can maybe tag team some of these, Steve, if you want to do Comgo and I could comment on it.
Comgo is a project or really a live platform now that's in production with some of the largest banks in the world, as well as some of the largest corporates, like Shell, for example. And what the problem that they were looking at to address with blockchain is, kind of the value chain and the B2B interactions in the commodity world when assets need to be financed, as assets kind of flow across borders and through different intermediaries. The financing aspect of that is quite complex, and so the leading players in that space got together and realized that rebuilding or reimagining those interactions between the stakeholders could be done a lot more efficiently on a blockchain. So initially, we're talking about letters of credit that flow amongst the relevant parties. And if you think about letters of credit, you're thinking about very private and sensitive pieces of data that banks and other players see as very proprietary. And I think something like a blockchain that is at its core a shared network. When you get into the enterprise blockchain world, there are many techniques to preserve privacy and get the right amount of confidentiality amongst transactions. So don't see that as a limiting factor, but it's a win-win because you can get both the network effects and the simplification of a network, but then on top of that, you have options and choices about the right amount of transparency and data sharing across that network.
Yeah, I think on some of the insights section, we'll get into some of what the takeaways from consortiums like Comgo on the business model and governance side as well.
And Steve, Sophia, and New York, if you don't mind just taking a pause, we've gotten several questions kind of around what is the advantage of the blockchain solution versus a centralized database. And so I want to make sure that everybody kind of understands that as a baseline before we continue the case studies.
Yeah, I think I'll share a couple of thoughts there. It's a very common question. I will say, if you Google it, you'll get many opinions, and there's lots that's been written on that. But I think fundamentally, a blockchain, there is a database there. For all the different protocols, there's a database like a level DB that's sitting there. But kind of on top of that database, thinking of it as more than a database, as kind of a computing platform, there's the smart contracts, where the business logic runs, and kind of creating an interesting coupling where you take now the business logic and the database and a consensus algorithm, right? So it's also this peer-to-peer network. And it's really a combination of of existing components in the IT space brought together and bound together by this consensus algorithm. And it's how you form consensus. And even a distributed database, it's a leader-follower or master-slave kind of model where it's still centralized in that one party dictates what goes into the ledger. That's not true fundamentally in a blockchain network. Depending on the acceptance criteria, different validators or voters or endorsers get to sign and vote on that transaction. And so you're decentralizing the acceptance or the validity of transactions. And once you've done that, you've now changed where we started on this deck, the trust model between the parties. You can set up the right sort of trust level for individual transactions.
Yeah, I would add to that if you were building a application inside of a single enterprise or even a single department in an enterprise, you would more than likely not use blockchain, right? Because it doesn't require you to have the same value propositions from a technology perspective when you're doing things like a cross-organizational workflow in a supply chain, or even a cross-organizational workflow in a bond registration, as an example, right? And so the qualities of blockchain on top of the underpinnings in terms of how the transactions are stored, which you could call a log or a database if you wanted to. And then, as Steve correctly points out, almost every blockchain stack actually has a database that's part of it. It's the organizational trust that you can get through the additional technologies on top of blockchain. Now, if you wanted to build a distributed database that also had a consensus algorithm, in some ways you might be able to call that something very close to a blockchain, but databases have other properties that make them very different than a sequenced, sort of linked transaction log.
Thanks, York, and thanks, Carolina. I think that was an important question to cover. I think for the next few, to give you a sense of the flavor at a business level of what people are using blockchain for, this slide, which we've paused on for a while, is, and you can hear the CDC speaking about this at the various HIMSS, local conferences, as they're growing the ecosystem of participants. It's looking at an 18-year-old messaging system for tuberculosis disease surveillance, and looking about how blockchain can eliminate some of the friction and pain points they have today on this older messaging rail, but then what more they can do with it now with this new collaboration. And there's actually 96 different disease states they monitor with these disease surveillance programs. So this is just the beginning for them in terms of where they can use the technology. This next one is all about financial inclusion. There are 35 million unbanked Filipinos, and there's actually 400 rural banks that service those communities that are unbanked themselves, so they're not even connected to SWIFT. So using blockchain to leapfrog basically a generation of technology and go right to blockchain to first starting with domestic remittances, and then they have a whole roadmap of foreign exchange, debit, credit cards, and then all the way up to a crypto peso. And then I believe this might be our final use case we're talking about, looking at how blockchain can be used to address national health problems. So in China, there's 110 million Chinese who are diagnosed with diabetes. About almost half of the population is on early stages of metabolic syndrome as well, just as diets change. So looking at how blockchain can really facilitate bringing together the right stakeholders and ecosystem for the early identification, prevention, and treatment of diabetes. And as part of this roadmap, also looking at that self-sovereignty of the data. So I think an interesting spectrum.
And there are lots of use cases that have that similarity, looking at what's broken in kind of business consumer relationships today, and using the technology as a way to put consumers more in control of whether it's their data, let's say, whether it's medical records or any number of things.
Yep. Final one is, this is actually a supply chain use case. This one, they actually have 300 million certified sustainable tuna products on a supply chain that's powered by blockchain out in the Pacific-Cal region of the world.
Okay, so now that we've given some examples out there, let's take a quick look at what it will take for those of you who are early stage and maybe doing active research, which is the majority of you out there today. This is what we see as a typical progression. Start by grappling with the technology, thinking, exploring different uses for it. There's lots of things to pick up along the way. new technologies, new paradigms, new programming languages, different consensus algorithm choice, different protocols, and so on. But once you get over the technology hump, then a lot of clients tend to find out that this is a shared network, and the idea of how this thing, as the question stated, is different than a database, and what does that mean operating that in practice? We call that shared IT. How a group of organizations together can collaborate, not just to get the smart contract written, but actually to keep it up and manage the life cycle of the network over time. And then as you get on to production, how do I integrate then this new network back into all of my traditional systems, all my middleware layers, all of my back office systems, and how do I scale this? And that could be member onboarding. How do I get to the next 100 members in the ecosystem, or it could be transaction volume as members ramp up, or as I create more use cases, I want the technology to keep up. Throughout all of this, you're looking for tools and solutions to help accelerate your journey. I think, in particular, with something like a network, it's very important to keep moving quickly as a group, whoever you're collaborating with, to build this out. Something like an as-a-service platform is even more appealing, where you can kind of level the playing field and get everyone involved easily, and with the right level of participation. One thing that we really wanted to communicate with you on the insights category is, as you're thinking about blockchain, you should be thinking way beyond the chain, if that makes sense. Blockchain is a lot more than just kind of the core protocol. There are what we can now think of as a technology stack of components that exist either natively on the chain or off the chain that help bridge kind of your existing systems that, integrating with core IT that you have today. How do identities that exist in your corporate directories, how do those map to on-chain identities? Your existing key systems that you have in place today, how does that map to the cryptography that's used on the blockchain? And then on top of that, as you're building these new generations of apps, there are many tools and components that are necessary. In fact, what we've seen is in the enterprise projects that are the farthest along, you can easily end up running 10, 15 of these components alongside the network itself. If you think of an enterprise stack of having perhaps 30 microservices or different components that go into a large-scale project, perhaps 40% of those are kind of around the blockchain and help bridge the blockchain with the app and also with your core systems.
Just one other point there, Steve. When we look at enterprise architecture for blockchain, I don't know if we have any architecture diagrams in this, but if you look at the pictures, it looks like about 20% of an architecture to create a full stack solution. And so when you think about like the top line here, which is industry solutions, there's a lot of either legacy systems or other non-blockchain oriented ingestion points, whether it's an IoT sensor or external or egress points to a visualization system or a reporting system, for example. And so the special sauce that is blockchain often is about 20% from an architectural perspective.
Yeah, good point. Kaleido, we've created as a blockchain stack platform that our intention is to have as many of those components either natively on the platform, or when we look at leading edge capabilities that exist in places like Azure and out where you already are, and tools that you're already using to build with, making it radically simple, to not get stuck on the chain, to get your core blockchain up, but then to really to build out your use case and to help you overcome some of those hurdles that we were talking about. So as part of that, we've introduced the Kaleido Marketplace, a collection of blockchain-specific technologies that are plug and play on the platform. Many of them run natively inside of the Kaleido platform, but we recognize that there are many other innovative blockchain platforms and components that are being built and hosted outside of the platform. So there are also a number of technologies that we integrate with, and we provide kind of the same sort of experience where you can click to deploy and connect and have a simplified integration experience, bringing those technologies and wiring those together. What I'd like to do is just spend a minute or two walking you through, 2 minutes walking you through this demo of what Kaleido looks like, so you get a sense of an enterprise platform. We start with what we call a consortium, or the industry now calls a consortium, but it's not that in a traditional sense. It's really a collection of business organizations. And you see that this health org has established itself as the first member in the consortium. We can then create physical environments underneath those environments where we have some interesting technology choices that we can make that are exposed as very simple choices on the blockchain. Of course, once we have the environment, we need nodes. So we can create nodes and customize how that node participates in consensus, a key ingredient to a blockchain network. So we've now spun up a couple nodes in the network. And in addition to that, if we wanted to now decentralize this network and invite other orgs to participate, we can invite an org to join. And the way that we do that is sending an email to a delegate that represents that organization. You can see governance built in. We can pass on those the right level of participation for that new member. And now that we have this multi-party blockchain network up and running, of course, our IT ops team would expect in a platform to be able to monitor the health of all the different assets. And let's go then into the marketplace, and let's not stop with the chain, as York was saying. Let's try to build up a larger percentage of the solution really quickly by leveraging the marketplace services. In this case, we're selecting a third-party technology that Kaleido has pre-integrated called OpenLaw, which has legal smart contracts, but there are many others that you could select as well. So there's just a really quick 2-minute step through to at least give you a taste for how there are platforms out there that don't require you to start from scratch. You can just log on, create an account very easily, and get over the technology hump very quickly. So now we're transitioning into the final segment of the call, and we'll do some questions and answers in just a couple minutes. But before we do that, we really want to get our thoughts on some of the pitfalls that we've seen and insights. And I know we've been peppering some thoughts along the way, but here's a few that we want to make explicit. One that we see a lot is being really focused on the technology early on, but not thinking about the organizational, multi-party, and business aspects of what the network is going to mean. The most successful organizations think about those things in parallel. This concept of consortium networks, if you want to Google that term or look for more resources that we'll be sending into your inbox, that's what the industry is called multi-party enterprise blockchain, for better or worse, because consortium is an existing term, but put that to the side. What we're seeing now, Deloitte has noticed that the majority of enterprises that they're surveying are either already in some sort of consortium blockchain network, or they're actively looking at joining one. So we're really seeing this pick up. In 2019 in particular, I think Gartner said something like 220% growth year over year in these consortium networks. If that's something that you were unsure about or skeptical about, there's enough data out there now that we can see that these models can work and can be adapted to really accelerate what you're trying to do with blockchain.
Yeah, just add to that, Steve, really quickly. We're past the point of validating the technology, and so what we're starting to see is people being much more thoughtful about these cross-party workflows and where there's actually a value proposition. And in fact, in a lot of consortium construction or formation stage, it's often discussions between those parties before they even touch technology to really understand, why are they collaborating together in a consortium? What's the value proposition of doing so? What are the types of data that we want to share? And how do we think about controlling those things?
And to pull that off, you want more than just a couple guys from IT on the project. You really want to bring in the right people from the line of business or from the right areas of the organization and get them together. And we've seen compliance and legal and all of those teams, interlocking and forming work groups that meet on their own to really advance this in parallel. And
I think that's a really good point, is that your blockchain pet project in your sandbox is not going to production unless you have a business line executive saying it must go to production on a certain date. And so when these things are forming, you often see that it's CEOs getting involved, or VP of supply chain, or someone in a treasury department, for example, because they're driving the requirement to do something that's different using this new technology that needs to then be supported by the IT team.
And you just mentioned on our next one here, drilling into the kind of consortium word or label, the right structure. And there are many ways to structure the consortium that we've seen. We just lay out the spectrum here from ad hoc, perhaps your existing business relationships are going to work fine. But in other cases, we've seen another extreme where organizations get together, create a new a new company, and start paying dues into that and form a board around that. And it's then the company's mission to really operate and grow the network.
And we've seen Comgo is a good example of that. We've also seen, I think, in the news examples where someone brings forward their idea, their IP, builds out the app, and then says, hey, everyone else come join my thing. And that is not going to work in some ecosystems and industries. So some various, York said, this is important enough to get right and think about even before hands are on the keyboard building the solution.
Another pitfall we've seen is we've worked with some early groups that have pushed to get into production, and a lot of times these tend to be homegrown systems, and you plant the success flag, two organizations working together, and then unfortunately too late realize they have no plan for how to onboard the next 50, 80, 100 members of the ecosystem. It didn't plan for that, and the shift, to use a classic example, is it built on rock or is it built on the shifting sand? Not being able to grow and scale the network. That thinking about those sorts of things earlier on is going to help you make the right decisions to get on a technology stack. It's both technology, it's the code, in other words, it's the network, it's the governance of how members come on. It's really a number of issues that need to be thought about early on as far as member growth. And the last one, adopting a wait and see attitude. That was probably a good strategy in 2016. But it's 2019 now, and I think it's really worth pointing out just how far the technology has matured. The fact that, while it's still kind of the tip of the spear or that first few percent that are in production, that the total number of supply chains and value chains and B2B networks we have in the world is quite large. And so we do have a number of production networks that are running now. And the learnings of those have been propagated back through the open source communities and the consultants and the blockchain companies at large. And so really, we encourage you now in 2019 to consider if you're one of the 78% who are now thinking, I don't want to lose my competitive edge. I want to think about my network and how a blockchain can help us stay ahead.
Yeah, and I think just the point I'll make here is that companies just leveling it up from just blockchain to digital transformation. I mean, if you look at the number of companies and the rate and pace of which they're dropping out of the S&P 500, who are the top companies today versus 10 years ago, you see the companies that have the highest value in the market are basically relatively new entrants. So companies that have been around for a while are realizing adopting a wait and see attitude can be a recipe for disaster. Things are moving so quickly these days across expectations for consumers, what they expect to experience and how they want to interact with you digitally. A blockchain's a piece of that, but certainly overall it's a prevailing trend.
So what we'd like to do is transition to a Q&A. Know that if you want to connect with us to talk about your project, we are very much available, and we're going to reach you via email with some follow-up artifacts and case studies and more details on some of these examples and pointers. But you can also find us on the web. We're on Twitter and everywhere that's social as well, and you can find us there. Okay, let's, Carolina, if you don't mind, let's spend a few minutes on Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just dive into the first question. What kind of capabilities does Kaleido have around network performance analysis as well as analytics?
Yeah, sure. A very good question. So the extent of Kaleido's platform today is all cloud-based. So the network, the underlying network backbone is quite robust. As far as analyzing, and I'm talking about the physical network now. I should make the distinction. As Kaleido becomes more hybrid and adds more options, I think the health of the physical network, as many folks know who've been around IT for a long time, there's the old joke that 90% of the sport tickets have nothing to do with the product. They're all about the network, the physical network, that is. We understand that that's a really important component that we'll need to have tooling for down the road. I think as far as the business network on top of that physical network, we offer both logging and operational monitoring statistics that you can either consume in the UI. You can get those via API, but you can also pipe those into your cloud provider's monitoring tool, and that allows you to pull all that data in to a system that you're already using to monitor other areas of your IT stack. So we've got that integration built in today. And then on analytics, I've kind of touched on some of the sorts of analytics that we have available on the platform today. There are other baseline tools like the Blockchain Explorer. We are actively talking to blockchain analytics companies out there that are interested in onboarding in our marketplace. So we intend to have even more options for you coming soon. So stay tuned on that one.
Great, thanks, Steve. So this question is around the idea of patents, and specifically, do you know if there's an opportunity to patent an idea that's on their blockchain network? I don't know if you're able to speak to this.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say that, you know, just from a process patent perspective, you can patent any process you want. So, you know, if that has underlying value proposition on top of blockchain, you can probably describe that in a way that's not too specific, and, you know, it's certainly something that you could do. I think just sort of along those lines, though, if you think about the value proposition of, you know, sort of where blockchain networks start to create something that's different than how we see it today, is the network itself, right? So if you have a specific blockchain network, it's very likely there will be a lot of applications running on that network and take an advantage of the shared data pooling that's happening on that network to create new value propositions. And that's, you know, doesn't mean that that's the only application on the network, right? It could be one of many applications.
Thank you, York. And just as a reminder, I will be sending out the presentation deck and the recording and some other kind of resources that we've touched on today for everyone. All right, so the next question is, how does Kaleido support kind of privacy and confidentiality?
Yeah, so I think when you get into aspects of security, you know, that's a very deep topic. I'm not going to be able to do it justice right now, but let me, at least in its entirety, but let me throw out a couple thoughts. One is understanding that what the core protocol gives you itself. So in a very generic sense, when we go from public blockchain to enterprise blockchain, what we're talking about is the same core technology, but layering on privacy and confidentiality and permissioning capabilities directly into the core protocol. So on Kaleido, you can, for example, select a private version of, or an enterprise version of blockchain called Quorum, which has privacy built into it. It has what they call a private enclave that allows for transactions to happen with very minimal sort of data exposure onto the chain itself. So many enterprise projects that we see would leverage and take a flavor of the blockchain protocol itself that lend them the right levels of privacy and confidentiality. Of course, Kaleido operates that as a service in the cloud. And so around that, we have an entire security model built in, and it's quite advanced, quite sophisticated. A third of the top 20 banks in the world are in production on Kaleido. So we've been through with risk and compliance teams, and we're happy to talk more about kind of the architecture and tenancy and those aspects of privacy and confidentiality that really Kaleido has around the chain. We're happy to connect more one-on-one to get into that. And there are resources, by the way, that talk about that out in the Kaleido knowledge base.
Perfect, I think that's helpful. So next question, do you have a marketplace component, say like a block viewer browser application that can be used with companies existing on ETH-based blockchain?
So the way that the marketplace works is it's integrated into chains that are running on Kaleido. So if you have your own private Ethereum blockchain that runs somewhere else, step one would be to connect with us, and we have done work in the migration utility area to help migrate onto Kaleido. Once you're on Kaleido, we have a block explorer that's built in to the platform. We have a number of other tools and components, and the services you see when you go to Marketplace Kaleido.io, all of those services are plug and play with that Kaleido-based chain that you have running. So I see a question about, do we have a white paper? The good news is we're well beyond the white paper stage. We've got a live product with many thousands of nodes that's running around the world. We encourage everyone. You can go to Kaleido.io, click try it for free, create an entirely free account called our perpetually free account called Starter, and just try it out, or get someone on your team to try it out as well. Now, we are doing some leading edge kind of thought leadership, if you will, in certain aspects of blockchain. As we talked about, it's much more than just the chain. There are many areas of innovation. And we do that in collaboration with leading partners like Consensus, like York at Microsoft. Also has been very active in the Ethereum community, and have announced a number of components and research areas. And so we do have white papers out there, but they're on specific topics like digital identity and like how these enterprise blockchains interact with public blockchains. So if you're interested in those sorts of resources, what I encourage you to do is Google Kaleido and GitHub and find it and look at our resources that are out on GitHub. The white papers are there, as well as a number of components and samples that we've open sourced.
So as we get closer kind of to the top of the hour here, maybe you can offer a few final thoughts, just to leave everybody with some, if nothing else, what can they take away from today?
Well, and I want to thank York, our special guest, and a true kind of a leader in the blockchain space, for joining us for this. It's been a lot of fun. And I'll let York, I'll let you go first with any parting thoughts that you might have.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Sophia and team. Great to collaborate with you, and happy that Kaleido's running on Azure. By the way, there was 1 or 2 word questions there that you might want to respond to offline. Blockchain is, like any other technology wave, a massive potential change in a lot of ways. And, it certainly has captured the executive suite in terms of, thinking that there are disruptive value propositions that companies should be looking at. From a technologist perspective, we see the most forward-thinking technologists, whether they're in an enterprise or in a startup, leaning forward and leaning in to either learn on their own time, like I did initially, or to pivot their job to that, whether it's in an enterprise or outside of an enterprise, which I also did, by the way. So it's a wonderful journey. It's always exciting to be on a technology wave. It always comes with the type of percentages that we talked about earlier in the conversation, where the leading edge thinkers and doers are in the 5% of production use cases, and then others will follow. And we have definitely passed the tipping point last year. I would say mid last year, from a technology comfort perspective, and I think we've now passed the tipping point from a awareness of production value propositions perspective. So it's just the beginning here of an amazing wave to surf. So I'm glad to be on the journey with you all.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for attending. I'm actually surprised so many of you are still on, so thanks for making it to the end. We, as Steve said, encourage you to try out Kaleido. We have a perpetually free starter tier, And once you're in the product in the console, we answer technical questions every day, and you can always reach us at info@Kaleido with more business-focused questions, although some of those come through our product as well. Really enjoy working with everyone on their blockchain projects, and here to support people in the journey.
Yeah, so I think those, you two wrapped it up really nicely, and thank you everyone for attending today. We hope to connect with you all again on more of these going forward, and also see you around.
And one other item real quick. We would like to know what other topics are of interest to you, kind of as a follow-up to this. I just put a link in the chat. So if you have any ideas or any kind of specific areas that you'd like to learn more about, please click on that link and let us know what you'd like to hear. Thanks again for joining us. We hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.